Hey everybody, it's Kevin with the wagon wheel of wisdom behind me, the obvious wagon wheel, and hopefully up here I have a little wisdom for you today. This is going to be an interesting topic as it is very near and dear to my heart space. It involved a tragic event, but I'd like to discuss suicide, most notably with my father, who happened to be a Vietnam War veteran. I don't think it's talked about enough right now, the amount of suicide rates, the suicide rates and how they've seemingly just gone through the roof. I have to believe in some capacity lockdowns, COVID, life stress, economy, things like that are coming into play, but also the one part that really, I guess, kind of bugs me the most with the high number of veteran suicide is it's well known, and I believe it's 22 to 23 veterans per day, which is it's astounding. That's a horrifying number to think about. But what I want to do is talk about my experience with this, and well, I'll just talk about my experience with it. So the time is 2001, September nonetheless, a month that the United States remembers quite vividly. September 7th to be exact. I come home from work that day, or excuse me, I gotta back up a little bit. I didn't come home, I came home to my parents' house. I was living in the same town at that time, but I came to their house and I wanted to grab something, and I had got done with work early. It was a Friday. I think I arrived there about 2 o'clock, and for some odd reason my dad was there. And I walked into the garage and he immediately greeted me at the door from the garage that goes into the house, and he had a half-shaven beard with shaving cream on one side and the other side was shaven and still in his work clothes. And I looked at him and I'm like, hey, what's up? And I go, aren't you supposed to be at work? And he looked at me and he goes, oh, I haven't been feeling well. And he kind of said it in an odd voice, but to look at him, I agreed. He didn't look very well at the time. So he went into the bathroom. He had asked what I was doing there, and I said I needed to grab something out of the basement. Well, I went downstairs and he was right down the stairs behind me, and I finally stopped. I'm like, dude, what's up? What's going on? He goes, oh, nothing. I just wanted to see what you were going to grab here in the back room. And I can't for the life of me remember what the heck it was I was grabbing at that point, but I ended up grabbing the item and left and went back to my apartment. Fast forward, as I said, that was on a Friday, September 7th. Fast forward, we all know September 11th, that was on a Tuesday. I was plumbing at the time. I happened to be, I think a lot of people remember where they were at that exact moment. I happened to be in my plumbing apprenticeship class when we got news, and the teacher wheeled in the TVs and was dealing with that and processing all of that. And fast forward to Friday, September 15th. I get home from work again, and around 5 or 6 o'clock, Mom calls me at my apartment and had asked if I had seen Dad. And very few moments in my life where you instantaneously know in the moment, but for whatever reason, when I heard her ask the question, do you know where your dad is? I knew he was dead. I knew I was never going to see him alive again. Don't ask me how I knew it. Don't ask me why I knew it. I just knew it. So she goes, have you seen your dad or heard from him? And I said, oh, fuck. And I hung up the phone. This is where it gets a little hard. Hung up the phone and beelined it over to their house. I immediately went down in the basement because that's where I kept the guns that I owned. I didn't keep them at my apartment. My apartment was smaller. And went down there, and my 22 was gone. The 22 I should say what he gave to me. It was actually his gun, an old pump action 22 of all guns. I forget what year it was, but it wasn't there. So Mom and I waited around for a little while and didn't hear from him, and ended up calling the local police department that night and filed a missing persons report. The following morning, again, no word, no sign, no nothing. I drove around at night with my girlfriend at the time and went looking for him. Didn't find anything. So my mom had began relaying, and this is before text message and all of that stuff, so it was all by phone, but calling her brothers and sisters and grandmothers. And so people started showing up at the house that morning, on Saturday morning. And I forget at what point, but my neighbor had come home, and she was an older woman, and really nice woman, by the way, and she had just came over and asked what was going on, and I had mentioned that we haven't heard from Dad, we don't know where he was at, and she goes, well, might be a wild goose chase, but I just saw his vehicle up the highway, or a vehicle that looked like his anyway, she said. And so I immediately got in my vehicle with my uncle. My girlfriend followed behind, and I drove about not even a mile from the house, seen his vehicle parked up. There's a hill going out of town, and about midway up was a field road, and sure enough, there was his car, his SUV, I should say, his Ford Explorer. When you talk about it, it brings back a lot of memories, bad memories. But I remember running up the hill, and when I got up there, I just seen him lying there and seen where the bullet wound was in his head. And I remember grabbing and throwing my hat and just sitting there and not real sure what to do. My uncle checked his vitals, but and he had said he's gone. But that wasn't even really the hardest part of the day. So I called 911. Police, EMS, fire department all shows up, and this is all local people. They all know me. And, once they put two and two together that the person who called 911 was the son of, because I had relayed that, then it started to register who the person was. And my dad was very well known throughout the town. I grew up in a small town, only about 2,000 people. He was a coach. He just knew people. He was a kind of a bullshitter in a way, and was really outgoing and just knew a lot of people in town there. So I was getting hugs and whatnot from all the local guys in the fire department, and this Dane County deputy shows up, the sheriff, and as he's walking up the hill, doesn't even look at me, points at me and goes, "You don't fucking move." And I kind of stepped back and I looked at the cop, or looked at the local cop. I'm like, what the fuck? And so he went up to where my dad was laying, and I looked at the local police chief. I said, "You know me. You know where I'm going. I'm heading back home. If he's got a problem with that, I don't really care." And I went back home, and I don't know what happened, but the cop didn't stop me. The local cop must have told him that we did file a missing persons report, and went back home and broke the news to everybody that was there. There was a detective that came to the house, a female, and my mom had spoke with her, and after she came upstairs, she said she wants to talk to you. And so I went downstairs, and if it wasn't bad enough for that asshole cop pointed at me and said that, she began railing on me with these questions like, how did your dad know where to shoot himself? How does a grown man who's 55 years old know where to shoot himself? If he wants to kill himself? That's really a question. And other questions that sounded insanely accusatory. And I sat back and I'm like, what the hell are you exactly accusing me of here? And she's like, oh, well, it's, we're ruling it a suicide in an almost condescending way, or a way of implying that perhaps I had something to do with it. As if shit wasn't bad enough at that point. And I'll explain why. So fast forward, we ended up having the funeral, and Mom pulled me aside after the burial at the church we were at. We were all gathered around and having dinner and whatnot. And my dad at the time worked at a shop that was just outside of town, and one of his coworkers happened to be a small business owner as well. He had both gigs, small business owner, and worked out at the shop that my dad was at. And he pulled my mom aside, and the shop, or the small business that he owned was a sporting goods store in town, a super small one, but I mean, anything you needed, fishing equipment, hunting equipment, all of that. He had that for sale out there, and it was really cool. But he pulled my mom aside and was absolutely bawling, and had explained to her that my dad brought the .22 to him because the trigger on it wouldn't pull, or which was accurate. It took a tremendous amount of actual strength because the trigger mechanism was jacked on it to actually get the thing to fire. I had known that. He wouldn't have known that because my dad wasn't a hunter at all. He, in fact, didn't like guns a whole lot and really didn't want them in the house as it was. And he did take me deer hunting a couple times, but it just wasn't his thing. You either like hunting or you don't, and he really didn't. So after Mom told me that, that's when it really sunk in. Now, they talk about PTSD, and I'm going to explain to you why my dad was really suffering, but I didn't really know about that at all. Growing up, I knew that he went to Vietnam, and I'll talk about this. So he had always told me that he had thought he was going to get drafted, or knew he was going to get drafted. So instead of being drafted by the Army or Marine Corps, he decided to voluntarily join up with the Navy. Universe works in odd ways. My dad was not really the combat type, and to avoid it, he thought joining the Navy would kind of get him away from it. Well, he was stationed on a hospital ship called the USS Repose, and it really messed him up. And things I'll talk about in a little bit here as to the reasons why, but it's a hospital ship, so you can about imagine what people get to see on there when the helicopters come with the wounded or the dead, for that matter, that didn't make it. So growing up, I had asked my dad a few times about things that he had saw with Vietnam, and he was always pretty quiet about it. And the things he talked about the most was the decent times they had over there, playing softball and playing basketball, and going to the Philippines. He talked about a few different times, but he never actually brought up what he had saw. And I want to say I was probably 16 or 17 and I finally, like, what did you see? And he responded, and he goes, do you really want to know? I'm curious, yeah. And he goes, I saw a guy with his fucking balls blowing off. I never asked him again after that. You could hear it. You could hear it in his voice. And as I found out later on, because of what I went through, he was certainly suffering from PTSD, and that generation, along with generations before him, just never really talked about it. You as a man, we're told to kind of, bury it, move on in life, get over it. And that's the one thing I'd like to talk about too, is PTSD, and I don't like the D at the end, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not a disorder. That to me sounds like you're flawed. You're not. You're processing a devastating event that is in your psyche, and it needs to be expressed in a healthy way. And what I've learned, and the irony here, is he was suffering from PTSD. I believe he went to go take his life in an area where he didn't think I would be the one to find him, or any family member that it would be, because it was along a main highway. His PTSD transferred right into my world, and then I began suffering from it for years. It's funny how life works out that way. But what I've discovered with PTSD is, and much like my dad, he hung on to those things and never expressed them. And I'll tell you what I hung on to for 19 years. 19 years I hung on to this, and I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't tell anybody about the fact that I came home on September 7th and found him shaving. And found him in that distressed look. And the reason he was on my ass going down in the basement when he followed me down there was because the gun wasn't there. I just didn't notice it. That gun was already ready to go in his vehicle. He was going to kill himself on that day. That's why he left work early. That's why he was shaving. He just didn't expect to come across me. You remember me talking about how the trigger was hard to pull on that gun. I think he went to attempt it and couldn't get the damn gun to fire. I think it was an attempt for him to become so frustrated that maybe his guardian angels didn't want him to go. And when he couldn't get the gun to fire, I can only assume that maybe he had changed his mind then. But being a Vietnam War veteran, and the guy hated war. During the first Gulf War, I was in 8th grade, and he was my basketball coach. When the bombs went on, I think Operation Desert Shield, or Desert Storm, sorry. When the bombs started to fall, he wanted to cancel practice that night. Instead, he took the TV up to practice. Just consumed by it. Just hated war because of what he saw. I think, just my theory, and this is what suicide does, it leaves you with far more questions than answers. But you rationalize things. The best way I can rationalize it, and the best theory, was he tried and it failed. And maybe it might have given him the green light to then live life a little better. But September 11th hit. It couldn't have been worse timing, and I don't mean to make that sound in a selfish way that it's about me, because that's not it. But I think, plane going over. I think once, well, that's kind of ironic too. I think that accelerated his depression and probably put a not so positive spin on life at that point, because he took the gun into his coworker fixed it, and then I don't know if it was Friday night or Saturday morning, but he pulled the trigger. So for 19 years I carried that burden around, blaming myself for missing the signs. And I didn't tell anybody. Much like him, I buried it. It was bad enough and hard enough to have cops accusing me, or I guess not necessarily accusing me, but implying that I took his life. It made it double as hard knowing that I fucking missed maybe the opportunity to stop something. People often tell me that regardless, he still would have went through it. And maybe that's the case. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. But the other aspect of this is for those 19 years, I absolutely hated the man for this, because he always told me that life never gets that bad where you need to take your life. So instead of missing him, I created this sense of hating him. It wasn't until I finally spoke up 19 years later in some emails to family and friends and expressed what I'm expressing to you now, that of what happened and how I blame myself, and it's gone from the hatred to me missing him now. I'm making a lot of peace with it, but as you can see, that there's still pain behind the eyes with this. It was a very here's the world as it were, and then you find out that this happened, and it's like, oh, here's your brand new world. Here you go. Take it or leave it. In fact, take it, because you don't get to leave it. You get to deal with it. And that is the aspect of suicide that is so fucking hard to comprehend or deal with. Is again, you have so little answers. Take people like me who didn't have a damn thing to do with it, but blame yourself for elements completely out of your control. And it decimates so much inside of a person, especially when they think they're partially responsible for it. During the 19 years that I didn't tell anybody about this, I too became suicidal. And this was actually something that helped me make peace with all of it. I was so pissed at him because I couldn't quite conceptualize or understand how somebody could get to that point. Well, I got to that point. I knew where I was going to do it. I knew how I was going to do it. And that voice inside of my head, each day, as I progressed to the day that I almost did it, it got a little louder every day. And the weird thing is, it was always followed by, it's going to be okay. And I actually got to a sense of almost being in total peace about it. I got to walk in my dad's shoes a little bit there. I never understood how somebody could do it until I almost did it myself. But this is the ebb and flow of what having to deal with someone close to you who does this. Not mad at him anymore. I'd love to have a conversation with him. I know I'll get to see him again, but it's been a hard, I was 24 at the time. I'm 46 now. In that aspect, it's been a long 22 years. It's been a challenging 22 years. But I feel compelled to tell people this because even though life does get really hard and throws a lot of wrinkles at you, there's also a lot of good things to stick around for. I wish like hell he could see my son, because I know he'd be really proud of him. You know, everybody deals with things a little different, but it really disrupted my life. I felt like a victim, like the world was against me, and it's not. It's just the world can be cruel at times. The hardest part, the hardest aspect in that is it oftentimes doesn't have a damn thing to do with you, even though you might think it does. But from what I can tell, and something that really kind of angers me, is it just seems like it's become so normalized for veterans and, men for that matter, because we, by the numbers, commit suicide far more than women do. It's just like it's become normalized, and it's almost okay to a degree, and it isn't. People need help. People need to talk about things. People need to get things out of their head, because it will consume you and it will eat you up inside if you don't. And it will get expressed in a way that might be detrimental to their own health or to your own health, or worse, the others around you. I feel compelled to get this message out to people. And if it saves one person who doesn't have to witness their mother or father or brother or sister or son or daughter doing something like this, then it's all worth it. I don't want you to have to see what I saw. I don't want to have you experience what I've had to experience, and I don't want you to put the blame on yourself like I have. It's okay to hurt inside, and as you can see, it hurts. It's 22 years and it still hurts. I still remember this shit like it happened yesterday. It's never gone away. There hasn't been an hour throughout every single day since the day it happened that I haven't thought about it in some way, shape, or form. It is always there. And to the people that say time heals, I have an argument for you on that one. It might lessen the blow to some degree, but it certainly, you'll never forget it. You'll never forget it. I haven't been able to. It's not to say maybe other people can't, but we got to get some help out to these people. Our veterans need it. People in society need it more than ever. The numbers don't lie, and it's scary is a word I can think of. If you like what you've heard, please like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to keep coming out with more videos like this, just kind of talk about my life's journey. I hope you found value in this. If you do, comment below if you can relate, because we need to hold each other's hand on this one a little bit, and it'll resonate with people. So, thank you.